Welcome to Bona Fide Dialogues with Christina Kueppers. Explore our three segments: legal tech, creativity, and paradigms and paradoxes.
Connect genuinely, broaden your perspective, and share your passion.
The paradox of death penalty. Paradigm shift on the issue of capital punishment, with Professor Connie De la Vega. Professor Constance Connie De la Vega writes extensively on international human rights law and participates in United Nations human rights meetings. She has submitted amicus briefs detailing international law standards to US courts for juvenile death penalty and affirmative action cases, including Roper v. Simmons and Graham and Sullivan v. Florida, and has been cited by the US Supreme Court. De la Vega is the co-author of The American Legal System for Foreign Lawyers, Wolters Kluwer, 2011, and International Human Rights Law, An Introduction, University of Pennsylvania Press, 2007. She established the Frank C. Newman International Human Rights Law Clinic at USF and is a founding member of Human Rights Advocates.
So let's talk about the paradox of death penalty. I would like to start this conversation by reciting Gandhi's quote, "An eye for eye makes the whole world blind." Why kill people who killed people to show that killing is wrong? If we're saying that premeditated murder is bad and our society is killing the person who killed another person, two wrongs do not make it right. What do you think about it?
Yes, I think two wrongs do not make it right. And I think that people don't understand that sometimes these murders take place for reasons that have nothing to do with what's right or what's wrong. It could just be accidental. There's also a lot of the people who commit crimes have had a lot of problems when they were growing up and were mistreated, and so there's a whole issue of the people who commit the crimes having. It's not that they are trying to amend whatever happened to them. It's just that they're not acting normally because of what happened to them.
Every time then people think about capital punishment, they think about serial killer, and they think about the victims and victims' families, how they feel. They right away imagine themselves being in that tragic situation. So why this person deserved to live another day, see the light, see the sunshine every single day, enjoy food, enjoy life, and the family of the victim will never have the opportunity to enjoy life with their loved ones.
Most people on death row are not serial killers. They've usually been convicted of committing one, maybe two crimes. So they're not serial killers. And I think, as I mentioned, one of the biggest issues is that oftentimes the person who commits a crime has had things happen to them in their lives that makes them react in a way that's not a normal way to act. And so the courts do take those things into consideration, especially when issuing a death penalty, and maybe when they're reviewing a death penalty. But I don't think that most of the time that when we're talking about the death penalty, that we're talking about serial killers being involved in the cases. I mean, there are some, but that also doesn't mean that they're not. They also have their problems. I mean, the serial killers also have problems, so it's not just the other
Yeah, but it doesn't justify what they did, right? And
No.
in criminal law, the principle of proportionality is used as a criteria for fairness and justice. So punishment should be proportional to the crime that was committed by the individual. And so why do you think in this instance, somebody who killed another person should not be killed?
Again, the reason being that there's so many reasons, there's all this background that goes into most of these murders. And the biggest background is the background of the person who has committed the murder. They often, like I said, have horrible backgrounds. They were mistreated as children, and
Abused, yeah.
And they were not taken care of, and so they will just react because they're not emotionally stable.
Yeah, so it's like society failed them once, and then they're on death row. Not every person who is on death row is actually a killer, right? So in many different countries, the death penalty is used not only for first-degree murder, but for example, for drug trafficking in China and Iran, terrorism, rape, human trafficking, corruption, kidnapping, and even unlawful sexual behavior.
Yes, so that is true. I'm more familiar with the United States, where usually the person on death row has committed a murder or killed someone, let's put it that way. Yeah. But it's true that in many countries, the death penalty is used in other situations where there hasn't been a murder committed. Sorry, my voice is going here. Where there hasn't been a murder committed. So, yeah, in that situation, you're not, again, it's not even, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. They're basically saying, okay, you did this bad thing and we're going to execute you. One of the things that happens here in the United States is that people are on death row for very long periods of time, oftentimes over 20 to 30 years. And so,
and I was looking at Iran, and as we see, there's so many human rights violations in that country. They have, they punish women by stoning to death. That's the type of death penalty. And it's unbelievable that something like this is still happening in the world. And again, when I was looking into Iran, apparently their marriage age for girls is 13, and fathers can agree for them to get married even earlier. And the numbers were astonishing. According to official figures, between March 2020 and 2021, the marriages of 31,379 girls aged between 10 and 14 were registered. So this is unbelievable, just unbelievable numbers. And today we're talking about death penalty, but just seeing all other violations of human rights, it's scary to think that this is the world we're living in.
Yeah, you think we would have made some advances by now, but we're still, I mean, and there have been some advances, but we're still living in what, in an era where the criminal law system is not always making sense, and is often being used for political reasons.
Yeah, we're talking about advances of how society is advanced. We always talk about technology, right? We think about technology, but why don't we address human advancement over centuries, looking into issues like this?
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting that there's still, in 2020, there was death penalty in Iran. 55-year-old man who's the father of two was executed for drinking alcohol for repeated offense, but still, this is unbelievable. So, and again, I wanted to talk about this because every time when you ask somebody, do you support death penalty? I think the first thought people have, they think about serial killers, very serious situations, but this is not the case all over the world. This is not the case. So this is very scary to think about it. And I was looking at the list of countries who still use death penalty. It's China, India, USA, Singapore, Nigeria, Iran, Japan, Taiwan. But it's surprising to see that the USA is on this list. We know that in China, especially when it comes to death penalty, there's no transparency. So there are some numbers, but nobody actually knows official numbers, how many people are being executed every year. We know that in Iran, the situation is not good, but seeing United States on this list, this is not the list you want to be on, right?
No,
So
and I think
why is that? And of course, we know that some states are different from others. Could you please talk about it a little bit?
I think that is the biggest issue, is that each state is there is a federal death penalty, but that is not where the majority of people are being executed. Is each individual state has their own laws and their own crimes that are punished by the death penalty. And like I said, I believe it's Texas. Again, Texas is one of the states with the largest populations, but there are, I think most of the executions, I mean, not most, but the biggest number of executions are taking place in Texas. California has the largest population in the United States. It has a large death row population, but hasn't had any executions for a long time. And so one of the issues right now, one of the actual violations that takes place is it's under international law. Being on death row for a long time is called the death row phenomena, and that's considered torture under international law. And there is an attempt now in California. It didn't go well last year, but they're going to try to put it on the ballot again next year and do a better job of explaining why the death penalty should be abolished in California. So that would deal with a lot of people that are on death row, because we have one of the largest death rows in the United States here.
Christina visited San Quentin State Prison as a law student in 2007. I remember walking into the execution chamber with Professor Connie De la Vega and my classmates. I still remember it as if it happened yesterday. We visited the old San Quentin death chamber as well. Some of us supported the death penalty, while some did not. After this experience, all of us had to rethink this issue. This dialogue is not an attempt to change your opinion. I encourage everyone to think about this issue from different perspectives. It is not an easy subject to discuss. We all need to remember that our right to have an opinion does not make our opinion right. Often changing your mind when presented with new information is a sign of intelligence. By the way, it's okay not to have an opinion. That means you are more open to learning.
Chamber hasn't been used for a long time, and it's no longer going to be, that is no longer where the executions are going to take place.
Yeah. So since then, it seems like they built a new one. And I read an article that they built a new one and spent 800,000 something on it, and it never been used as well. It's nonsense, isn't it?
Yes, I think the problem is that the people who support the death penalty do not think about the costs of it, because it's not just, building the death chamber and how much that costs, but there's the cost of providing defense in death penalty cases is way higher than it is in regular cases. So there's also a huge amount of money being spent on defense lawyers. I've even been told by a person on death row that they don't want to have the death penalty taken away because then they wouldn't have their lawyer anymore.
Let's talk about a day of life for a person on a death row.
Well, they each have their own individual cell, which is different than most of the people on death and in San Quentin that you saw. And the people that aren't on death row are they open their doors to their cells at 6 o'clock in the morning, and out they go to do whatever they're going to do during the day. Whereas the death row people cannot leave their cells at all, so they're stuck in their cells the whole time. They might have some individual places for them to get out and do some exercise, but they have a lot more restrictions on what they can do on death row.
About the human contact, can they talk to other inmates or not?
No, they can take visitors, and with the purpose of the criminal system is to either deter crime or punish. Deterrence is not coming from a lot of these sentences that are being given out. And punishment, well, okay, is it going to, after a lot of the people that I've seen in prison who've been in the prisons for a long time, they've got a lot of rehab programs there for them. A lot of them are able to overcome whatever problems they've had and probably would not
commit the crime again. Yes,
crime. Right, exactly.
It goes back to the system we have in place. Do they have the opportunity for the rehabilitation? Even when we visited San Quentin prison, I was surprised that that there's so many opportunities for them to become a better citizen later on. And right. They can go to church, and they work with psychologists, right, and other professionals, and
they have training programs there for them. When they get out, they can they've got a skill that they can use to take care of themselves.
Be your neighbor, right? It will be somebody on the street. You should want them to spend this time to prepare themselves for coming back to society and adjust and not go back to committing another crime.
Exactly. Well, as you saw when you went on the tour of San Quentin, they do have an incredible training program where they show a lot of skills. I think you might have seen the carpentry shop where they were showing how to make furniture. And so the prisoners know how to do that. But they have other skills that they learn there. And so, yes, there are programs. Again, probably San Quentin is one of the better prisons in California. In fact, a lot of prisoners want to go to San Quentin because they know they can be trained there to get a job when they get out of prison.
And another issue, I think, that it's not often discussed, that the actual execution, there's a deaf team, and the person who actually has to do that, there's a famous, if you can say, famous former executioner, Jerry Gibbons, who executed 62 people, and at the end of his life became an activist against death penalty. Mm-hmm. So first of all, he said that I realized that I didn't prevent any new crimes.
Right. Again, I don't think that using the argument that you're going to prevent new crimes is really going to is a valuable or even something that can be justified, because executing someone does not necessarily, certainly that person's not going to do any more harm, except for that person may not do any more harm either, especially the alternative to being on death row is to have a life without parole sentence. And if you're in jail the rest of your life, you're not going to be
but the people who support death penalty, they say, okay, another person who is about to commit that crime, they know that, they can be sentenced to death for their crime, and that may stop them. But statistics shows that that's not the case, right?
No, there's no deterrence from the death penalty. I think people committing crimes are not thinking about what's going to happen if they commit the crime as far as being sentenced one way or the other. They're not, that's not what's going through their heads at the time that they commit their crime. So it does not, there's no evidence that the death penalty helps to deter crime.
Yes, and whereas a society, we're saying, okay, this person will kill this person, right? And who will be doing it? The people who actually on that death team, it's not fair to them. I don't know if anybody even discussed that, aspect of death penalty, the actual execution. And, there should be medical professional in the room, and it's against their beliefs. And many companies, pharmaceutical companies, are also saying, we don't want you to use our drugs for
the death penalty
purposes. Right. Yeah.
Right. So that causes a lot of problems for the actual executions. And again, as I've said, in California, they, in theory, have in place what they're going to do, but they haven't had to use it. So we don't know if it's going to work or not, whatever they've gotten in place. The place to see how these executions are taking place is in Texas, where there are so many executions. Yeah, I mean, there's an issue about who's doing it. That's always been the case. One of the areas, there have been some advances in how the death penalty is addressed in the United States. And one of the biggest advances was the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that the execution or using the death penalty for persons who were under 18 at the time they committed their crime was unconstitutional. And that was a big advancement at the time because, in fact, I think—
I know you played an important role in that.
Well, I brought the international law to the attention of the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Kennedy cited to the laws that we applied, that we had addressed in the brief that we filed. It was an amicus curiae brief on behalf of human rights groups. And I think he found it compelling that we were the only country that was, there are actually about 5 or 6 countries using the juvenile death penalty, but they're none of the countries that we as a society would think, we should be aligned with. So I think that made a big difference for him to understand that. What's interesting about what happens to people the juveniles who are now sentenced get juvenile life without parole, and we're actually the only country in the world using the juvenile life without parole. So one would think that we would get rid of that sentence too, but we haven't gotten there yet. We're still working on that one.
You dedicated all your life advocating for human rights. And could you tell me, when did you decide in your life that this is something you want to do? Something that triggered this decision in your childhood, or there was some inspirational person, or what happened?
Well, I think what happened was I went to law school, and I took the first semester of law school, and I was like, having been in Mexico and then only being in 4 years in college and then going to law school and seeing all these contracts and property and all this stuff, there was nothing that I was really relating to. But my second semester, first year, we were allowed to take international human rights law, which I took with Professor Frank Newman. And I realized while I was taking that class, this is why I came to law school.
Yeah, this is your passion.
So it was after that, I took the class, and then I went to Geneva with Professor Newman, and he showed me, I went and observed the UN procedures. I really wasn't sure what was going on, but my second semester of my junior year, or my second year of law school, I went to Geneva and did an externship at the International Commission of Jurists. So I got to see the use of the procedures there. by actually being there and participating in them.
And now you're taking students every year, and they have this opportunity to learn and make a difference in the future. Could you please talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so I have an international human rights law clinic, and the students work on a particular issue that's going to be addressed by either the UN meetings in Geneva or in New York. The Commission on Status of Women meets in New York, and the students prepare reports and prepare advocacy plans so that they can try to get language into resolutions that will then be able to be used in countries around the world, including the United States, in courts to help advocate on behalf of human rights issues.
That's great. And what do we need to do here in the US so we can abolish capital punishment? Yeah, looking at the numbers and seeing that more than half of population in the United States actually supports death penalty, it tells me that we need to have more dialogues about this issue, need more education in that area. But what else? What some actionable steps we can take? So we get off this list with China and Iran, you know?
Well, the critical thing is for the US public to understand that the death penalty does not deter crime. And so if they're trying to deter crime, certainly the death penalty is not going to do that. And I think that information needs to get out more. Now, there are people who think, okay, we're going to use the death penalty to do the eye for the eye argument. But that's only usually the very limited part of the population that's been affected because one of their friends or relatives have been killed. So I think the critical thing is to get information out about the fact that it does not deter crime to have the death penalty. And I think that there's even here in California, it was still approved last year's election, but I think the people working on trying to get rid of the death penalty realize they need to do a better job of educating the population about this particular sentence not providing very much help. And the other thing that they have to do is it's incredibly expensive to run the death penalty. The lawyer fees and are way higher than in other cases. They have a special place in San Quentin where they stay, and it's only one person per cell, so that's way more expensive than all the other sentences. So besides the fact that there's no deterrence, the cost of this penalty needs to be explained to the people in California for now, but people in the United States as well.
Reasons to abolish the death penalty. Capital punishment is cruel and unusual. It is barbaric. The death penalty goes against our most basic human right, the right to life. It does not deter crime. It is irreversible and mistakes happen. It is discriminatory. It is used as political tool. Death penalty is a waste of taxpayer funds. Opposing the death penalty does not indicate a lack of sympathy for murder victims. Many victims' families oppose the death penalty. A society that respects life does not deliberately kill human beings. Correctional officers that participate in executions suffer life-altering trauma.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and I hope we can connect again and talk about other issues.